In the shop today, we have a 2001 Dodge Caravan with a 3.8 engine and a little over 118,000 miles on it. The owner is concerned because intermittently it is hard to start. When it does start, it runs rough, misfires, and sometimes under a load, it will even backfire through the throttle body. A very capable local shop asked us to take a look at this vehicle. They have tested the fuel pressure, crank and cam sensor signals, and scoped both those sensors at the same time, confirming they are in sync and the timing chain is sound. After some experimentation, we found we could get the vehicle to act up by power braking the engine and running the RPM between 1500 and 2000. The most challenging of these symptoms is the backfiring through the throttle body. For this to occur, combustion has to take place in a cylinder while the intake valve is open. Here's a scope pattern we saved as the problem was not occurring. This is the pattern when the problem was present. As you can see, at times the spark was not bridging the spark plug gap. This led us to take a close look at the spark plugs. On spark plug number 3, you can see a carbon track where the spark was jumping down the side of the spark plug. For this reason, we decided to pull the plugs for a close inspection. We found excessive amounts of anti-seize compound on the threads. This vehicle has a DIS ignition system, which uses the threads of the spark plug as an electrical conductor. We later found out the owner of the vehicle installed the plugs 6 months ago and used this anti-seize compound. We installed new plugs and cleaned the threads in the heads, and the problem was solved. I am still curious and confused. How could an excessive amount of anti-seize compound on the spark plugs cause the engine to backfire through the throttle body? I think it's time for another opinion. With me today I have one of our senior project engineers, Mike Dale. I brought him the spark plugs and the spark plug wires for him to check out. Let's see what he found. Mike?
All right, well thanks Mark, I appreciate the gift. Boxes like this are always interesting to engineers like myself. We understand and we know that a box of trouble like this represents the problem that somebody had in a vehicle somewhere, and we really make a strong effort to take a close look, and figure out what went wrong. The report that we have here is that this is from a Chrysler minivan 3.8 liter engine. It's from a DIS type system, and the complaint is that there was a severe misfire and backfiring of this vehicle through the intake manifold system. When we take out a part like this, the very first thing that we do is we take a very good look at it. We look at it under microscopes, we look at it from the outside. We're aware of a military study one time that said when they really figured out how people fixed vehicles or fixed trouble in whatever they're working on, that the visual inspection is the strong first step to take. In this particular case, there's all kinds of interesting information here to see. The very first thing we noticed when we look at this particular spark plug is that there's severe arc marks down the side of the ceramic. That tells a lot. This is a DIS system. This means that instead of the high voltage jumping across the arc at the business end of this spark plug, something was wrong here, and so it had to find another way home. This electrical system that's on this particular vehicle is probably capable of 35,000 volts. That much voltage will arc to somewhere. In the old days, we had distributors, and when the spark plug couldn't fire where it was supposed to, oftentimes the arcing occurred inside the distributor. This is a DIS system. It doesn't have that opportunity. So what happened here is that instead of firing at the spark gap where it was meant to, this spark plug was actually arcing down the side of the spark plug, and you can actually even see a burn mark where it hit the steel shell. If you look at this closely under a microscope, you can also see that the ceramic is actually cracked on this spark plug. So now the question is we know that this was misfiring, why? So what we did, we put it under a microscope, and with the help of a computer and a camera, we're able to take this particular picture for you. What we can see here is that this ceramic is covered in a heavy brown contamination that doesn't belong there. When we looked at it with an ohm meter, we found that the side of the center electrode is not electrically conductive. This too is covered with a brown ash. When we actually set this up in the lab and tried to fire the spark plug, we found that it wasn't jumping between the two obvious terminals. It was jumping down the side onto the ceramic, and it was also arcing to the back shell of the electrode. This is a prime example of a fouled spark plug that cannot jump this gap, and so the result is that it's arcing down the side of the spark plug. Here's a picture of what that looks like, and you can clearly see the arc path down the side of the spark plug. But there's something more to see here. Do you notice that the arc is only happening at the top of these ribs? Those ribs are there in an effort to try to hold on to that 35,000 volts. It makes the path longer that the high voltage has to arc along. So these ribs are not working in the way they're supposed to. What was supposed to happen can be seen here in the spark plug boot. In the package with the spark plugs comes a grease packet. That grease is supposed to be applied to the inside of the boot. It has several functions. One is it's supposed to keep the boot from sticking to the spark plug, so the next time you pull it off, you don't tear the boot. That's only one of the functions of it. It's also there to fill that gap between the boot and the ceramic. It's also there to help the boot fit into the ribs of the ceramic. The reports of this particular engine indicate that it was firing back through the intake manifold. What happened in this case is this spark plug became so contaminated that it couldn't arc here, and it was actually arcing down through here and arcing over to the back of the ground electrode. When you have the ignition actually occurring down in here, it tends to lead to a buildup of carbon. That carbon then creates hot spots. So the next time the intake valve opens, the new fuel and air coming in, instead of firing off when the spark gap says it should, it may pre-ignite and blow back up through the intake manifold system. So then the question is what caused the contamination of the spark plug gap? That's an interesting story. We can look and see in these threads that somebody has coated the spark plug with an anti-seize compound. Typically materials like that come in jars like this, and when you take the top off, you have a big goopy mess on the end of the application stick. The trouble with this is that a little bit of anti-seize might be a good idea, but anything like this much and this inaccurately applied amount of material can cause trouble. We checked with the websites of 3 different spark plug manufacturers. The interesting thing is that all 3 of them recommend against using anti-seize. More importantly, they come up with reasons not to use it that may not be intuitive to you. So let's go over that. The first reason they say not to use the anti-seize is that basically it is a grease with metal particles in it. The reason that it works in preventing seizing is that the metal particles between the threads sacrifice themselves rather than the metal from the spark plug being transferred to the head and from the head back to the threads. So that's why it works. But the problem is that in lubricating the threads with that grease, it totally upsets your ability to use a torque wrench to accurately set the tightness of the spark plug. Torque wrench? Why are we using a torque wrench? Times have changed. We used to just change those spark plugs, tighten them, we have a feel in our hand how tight it needed to be. The answer is the grease affects how that fits. You don't want to put spark plugs anymore without using the torque wrench. You have to do that. This metal shell on the side is only 60 thousandths of an inch thick. It's fragile. If you over torque the spark plug, you have the chance to do several bad things. One of them is you can stretch these threads. What it does is it may, if it's severe enough, actually crack and break the spark plug. The other thing it may do is it may jam the threads so the next fella coming along thinks that the spark plug is seized because of the aluminum and the steel, but really it's seized because somebody over torqued the spark plug into the cylinder head. The other risk with inaccurately applied anti-seize is that when you put it in, there's only so much room between the threads of the cylinder head and the threads of the spark plug. Excess material pumps in both directions by the action of screwing this into the cylinder head. In this particular case, we can see where excess anti-seize has pumped itself back up and away from the spark plug end, but also in this contamination, we can see that it pumped its way back towards the business end of the spark plug. So the use of anti-seize has several risks. You can over-torque the spark plug accidentally, you can damage the spark plug, you can make the spark plug miserable for the next guy to take out, and in this particular case, you can contaminate the spark plug end, force the failure along the ceramic, and cause a comeback that neither you nor anybody else wants.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Excellent information.
You're welcome.
Remember, when you're using anti-seize compound, use it sparingly. We'll see you again next time in the Wells Garage.